In 2004, construction crews in Istanbul began digging the foundation for a new underground train station, the Yenikapu district, on the European side of the city. The station was part of the Marmaray project, a rail tunnel that would run beneath the Bosphorus and connect Europe to Asia for the first time by standard gauge rail. It was the most ambitious infrastructure project in Turkey's history. The tunnel alone would sit 60 meters below sea level, assembled from 11 immersed sections, each weighing up to 18,000 tons. The engineers had anticipated some archaeological interference. Istanbul has been continuously inhabited for at least 2,500 years. The city sits on top of itself, layer upon layer, Ottoman over Byzantine, over Roman, over Greek. Any major excavation in the historic peninsula is expected to encounter fragments of the past. Provisions were made. Archaeologists were assigned to monitor the dig. The project timeline built in a buffer for minor delays. What they hit was not minor. Before we dive in, this channel explores the hidden worlds buried beneath the surface. Hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it. The first sign came when workers digging through the soft earth of the Yenikapi construction site, roughly 1 meter below modern sea level, began pulling up fragments of rope and wood. Not modern wood, old wood. Waterlogged, darkened, preserved in the wet clay for centuries. Within days, archaeologists identified the material as the remains of a ship. Then they found another, then the outlines of a harbor wall, then stone anchors, then amphorae, then the remains of a massive stone quay with rectangular holes cut into it for mooring lines. They had broken through into the Harbour of Theodosius, the largest commercial port in Constantinople during the early Byzantine Empire. A harbor that had been built in the 4th century under Emperor Theodosius I, had served as the economic heart of the Byzantine capital for 700 years, and had then silted up so completely that by the 16th century it was buried beneath farmland and gardens. By the 20th century, houses had been built on top of it. Nobody knew it was there. The maps showed it in approximately the right area, but its exact location, its dimensions, and its depth were all unknown. Constantinople, the city that became Istanbul, was founded as a Roman capital in 330 of the Common Era. Within decades, its population exploded. The city needed grain, wine, oil, timber, stone, spices, silk, and slaves, all arriving by sea. The natural harbors along the Golden Horn served the northern trade routes, but the empire's lifeline ran south through the Sea of Marmara and across the Mediterranean to Egypt, North Africa, and the Levant. Theodosius built his harbor on the Marmara shore specifically to handle this traffic. At its peak, it was the point of entry for the grain supply that fed the entire capital. Hundreds of ships docked there every year. The harbor had stone quays, wooden piers, warehouses, and breakwaters. A river called the Lycos drained from the hills above the city into the harbor basin. And over the centuries, the sediment it carried began to fill the harbor from the inside out. By the 7th century, when the Arab conquests cut off the grain shipments from Egypt, the harbor's importance declined, but it continued to function in reduced capacity for another 400 years, receiving smaller vessels and coastal traders. By the 11th century, the siltation was severe enough that only small boats could navigate the shallows. By the 15th century, the harbor was gone. The Lycos had finished its work. The basin was filled. Farmland grew where ships had once anchored, and the memory of the harbor faded from the city's consciousness entirely. The river itself was built over in the 1950s and is no longer visible on the surface. The construction stopped. Under Turkish law, control of any site containing significant archaeological remains transfers immediately to the museum authority, and the use of mechanical tools is suspended. From 2004 onward, workers with shovels and wheelbarrows replaced the heavy machinery. Hundreds of laborers and archaeologists from the Istanbul archaeological museums worked in shifts, sometimes around the clock, to excavate the site before the engineers could resume. The excavation lasted 9 years. Between 2004 and 2013, The Yenikapi dig became one of the largest archaeological excavations ever conducted in Europe. The site covered more than 58,000 square meters. The deposit was 12 meters deep, representing an unbroken sequence of human activity from the Ottoman period all the way down to the Neolithic. Over 100,000 artifacts were recovered. Recovered objects included pottery, coins, combs, leather sandals, bronze mirrors, ivory game pieces, glass vessels, oil lamps, keys, wooden spoons, and perfume bottles. They also found the bones of camels, horses, bears, ostriches, elephants, lions, dolphins, and thousands of fish, and the skulls of criminals whose severed heads may have been tossed into the harbor waters. All of it was sealed in mud and silt for centuries, preserved by the same waterlogged conditions that had hidden the harbor from the modern world. But the most extraordinary finds were the ships. 37 of them, shipwrecks dating from the 5th to the 11th century, buried in the harbor sediment where they had sunk over the course of 700 years. Merchant vessels, fishing boats, coastal transports, and rare military galleys with oar ports still visible in the hull planking. They had been preserved by the anaerobic conditions of the mud, their timbers still intact, their construction details still legible to marine archaeologists who had never seen anything like this collection. No single excavation had ever produced this many ancient shipwrecks. Underwater archaeologists had spent decades recovering individual vessels from the Mediterranean seabed, one at a time, at enormous cost. Here, in the mud beneath an Istanbul neighborhood, 37 ships emerged from a single dig. The collection was so large and so well preserved that it fundamentally changed what was known about Byzantine shipbuilding. The transition from shell-first construction, where the outer hull was built before the internal frame, to skeleton-first construction, where the frame was built first and the planking attached to it, had been poorly understood. The Yenikapi ships documented this transition across centuries, ship by ship, in a single harbor. One vessel, designated YK-35, contained a small wooden box with a folding lid, a writing tablet that journalists dubbed the Byzantine iPad. Another ship carried amphorae filled with grape seeds, evidence of the wine trade that sustained the Byzantine economy. Stone anchors, some weighing hundreds of kilograms, were found scattered across the harbor floor. The remains of a wooden pier, its stakes still driven into the seabed, stretched over 43 meters, marking the spot where ships had loaded and unloaded for centuries. The ships had likely sunk during a series of natural disasters, storms or tsunamis that drove vessels against the harbor walls and capsized them in shallow water. The harbor authorities never recovered the wrecks. They simply sank into the silt, one on top of another, as the harbor floor slowly rose over the centuries. Eventually, the sediment from the Lycos River, a stream that drained into the harbor from the hills above the city, filled the basin entirely. By the 15th century, the harbor no longer existed as a body of water. It was dry land, and beneath that dry land, 37 ships lay in formation, waiting. But the ships were not the deepest layer. Beneath the harbor floor, at a depth of more than 6 meters below modern sea level, the excavation reached something much older, a Neolithic settlement dating to approximately 6,500 BCE. It is the oldest known evidence of human habitation in Istanbul, pushing the city's documented history back by 2,500 years beyond what had previously been established. The settlement had been built on the shore of the Sea of Marmara when the sea was still a freshwater lake, smaller and lower than it is today. Rising sea levels after the last ice age eventually submerged the site, sealing it beneath marine sediment and then beneath the harbor that was built on top of it thousands of years later. A swamp had formed in a small depression near the Lycos stream channel roughly 11,000 years ago, and the Neolithic inhabitants had settled at its edge, drawn by the fresh water and the fertile ground. The swamp ceased to exist about 7,400 years ago, buried under the rising sea. The Neolithic structures were simple but deliberate. Circular and rectangular houses were built with wooden posts driven into the ground, reinforced with stones, and their walls were made of wattle and daub plastered with mud. Some of the wooden structural elements were preserved in the waterlogged clay, an extraordinary rarity for Neolithic sites anywhere in the world, where organic material almost never survives. Inside and around the houses, archaeologists found pottery, stone tools, flint blades, arrowheads, and a carnelian seal. They found graves, some containing skeletons in the fetal position, a burial practice common across Neolithic Anatolia. They found 7 cremation burials, a type that had been entirely unknown in Anatolian Neolithic contexts until this excavation, forcing researchers to reconsider what they thought they knew about the funerary practices of the region's earliest inhabitants. And in the soft sediment around the structures, they found something no one had expected. Hundreds of preserved human footprints pressed into the mud 8,500 years ago. The first such examples known in Anatolian archaeology. Adults and children had walked through this settlement, their feet sinking into the wet ground beside the Marmaray shore, and the impressions had been preserved under layers of clay, salt water, harbor silt, and urban fill for 85 centuries. People had walked across this ground 85 centuries ago. They left their footprints in the wet earth. The mud hardened, the sea rose, the harbor was built, the ships sank. The silt filled in, the houses were built on top. And in 2004, a construction crew digging a foundation for a train station broke through all of it, layer by layer, century by century, all the way down to the bottom. The Marmaray project was originally scheduled for completion in 2009. It opened in 2013, 4 years late, delayed almost entirely by the archaeology beneath the Yenikapi station. The Turkish government, under then Prime Minister Erdogan, who had championed the project as a symbol of modern Turkey's ambition to connect continents, publicly expressed frustration at the delays. The tension between the archaeologists and the engineers was constant. The archaeologists needed decades to properly excavate what they had found. The engineers needed the site cleared for construction. Turkish law sided with the archaeologists, but political pressure pushed the timeline. In the end, the archaeologists finished. The artifacts were removed. The ships were extracted over a period of 8 years, each one lifted from the mud with painstaking care, their waterlogged timbers requiring constant moisture to prevent collapse. The 100,000 artifacts were transferred to the Istanbul Archaeological Museum. Plans were drawn up for a dedicated museum and archaeological park at the Yenikapi site, designed by architect Peter Eisenman. The onshore remains of the harbor walls, the stone quay, and a section of the breakwater were preserved in their original location. The Marmaray Tunnel opened. Trains now run beneath the Bosphorus, connecting Halkali on the European side to Gebze on the Asian side, carrying over 1 million passengers a day through the same ground that held a Neolithic village, a Byzantine harbor, 37 shipwrecks, and the footprints of people who lived there before the sea rose and swallowed everything. Istanbul is a city that has always been built on top of itself. Greek over Neolithic, Roman over Greek, Byzantine over Roman, Ottoman over Byzantine, modern over Ottoman. Each layer buries the last. Each new construction project risks breaking through into the one below it. And the Yenikapi site was not even the only Marmaray excavation. At the Sirkici station on the European side, near the mouth of the Golden Horn, workers uncovered the remains of the Prosphorion harbor, the first port built in the area when the city was still called Byzantium, centuries before Constantinople was founded. Beneath the Ottoman and Byzantine layers, they found pottery and structural remains from the Archaic, Classical, and Hellenistic periods, evidence that the harbor had been in continuous use for over 2,000 years. On the Asian side, at the Üsküdar station, excavations between 2004 and 2008 revealed the foundation of a Byzantine apsidal structure, likely a church surrounded by 97 skeletons, including women and children. Beneath those layers, they found remains from the Roman, Hellenistic, and Classical periods, extending the archaeological record of the Asian shore back centuries further than previously documented. The Marmaray project did not discover one site. It discovered 3 at 3 different stations on 2 different continents, spanning 8,500 years of continuous human occupation. 60,000 artifacts from the Yenikapi and Sirkeci excavations alone are being preserved in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, waiting for a dedicated exhibition space that has not yet been built. The Marmaray project tried to build a train station. What it built instead was a cross-section of 8,500 years of human civilization, cut 12 meters deep into the earth beneath one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on the planet. The station is open now, the trains are running, and the footprints of the people who lived there first are in a museum pressed into clay that is older than the city above them by 5,000 years. Thanks for watching. If this is the kind of exploration you want to follow, subscribe. There is more to come.